Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual program. My name is Andrew Gustafson, and I am joining you from Vermont. Um, as some of you know who've been on our programs in the past, we spend some time up here. We're very lucky to have family up here. And so I am not skiing today, but Cindy is, and she's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. So today I'm going to be talking about the history of skiing, and we're going to go back well over 100 years to talk about this, but we also wanted to bring you some a little bit of live skiing. So I said Cindy was in the ski slopes, but we also have a close friend of ours, Ben Cranes, who is at Smuggler's Notch, which is in northern Vermont. We're gonna talk to Ben a little bit about the ski industry and the sort of evolution of skiing, and really, how the industry has really changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. It's become a lot more expensive. It's become a lot more difficult to operate. It's become highly consolidated. And of course, climate change has had a big impact on that.
Well,
Yes.
it's a beautiful day here. We're in Cambridge, Vermont, northern Vermont. It's been snowing all morning, but now you can see the sun has come out, and we are looking up right now at the peak of Sterling Mountain straight ahead, and lots of people waiting online on this beautiful Friday afternoon.
Yeah. So Ben, you and I have been skiing together now for over 20 years.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, so Ben and I went to college together and skied together a lot. But Smuggler's Notch is a little bit different from a lot of the mountains, especially in New England, but across the country, in that it's still an independent mountain, right?
Smuggler's Notch is one of the few independent mountains left in Vermont. Most of them, there have been massive consolidation in the industry, led by Vail. A lot of people who ski know of Vail, Colorado. It's one of the largest ski resorts in the world, and they've just been buying up resort after resort from major complexes like Park City, Utah, to small trash heaps in Michigan, and
that's not a judgment. That's some there resorts that are literally built on landfills.
My wife, who I love very much, learned to ski on a landfill in Michigan. and they're now being, there's a competitor now, Altera, which is a conglomeration of other large companies, other large resorts such as Aspen and Squaw Valley and Lake Tahoe, California. And the big idea is that instead of showing up every day and buying your lift ticket like you once would, now you buy a pass that gives you loyalty to that company for the entire season. So you could ski at any Vail resort for the whole season, and for about $1,000. This is great for people who ski regularly, but it does make it a lot harder to enter the sport.
Because we now have resorts that a single day lift ticket is in excess of $200.
Yeah, I think at Vail's main resorts, it's over $250 for a day, and even at smaller independent resorts, it's still upwards of $80.
Yeah. So we've seen huge inflation, but we've also seen a lot of ski resorts close. I mean, some have closed because of COVID, but resorts were also closing a lot over the last couple decades. Ben might have cut out a little bit as he's skiing down the hill.
So resort like where I am now, Smuggler's Notch, and continue, Andrew.
Oh yeah, so I was just talking about resorts closing.
Absolutely. And I'm just skiing. I'll take you up onto the lift with me. We're getting onto the lift to this is Madonna Peak. Oh, there's a lawn lift line. So we'll just hang out here for a few minutes.
So Ben, Amy has a question, which is what are the Vail-owned resorts in Vermont?
Stowe is now Vail owned. I believe Okemo is as well. And at least two others. I know they bought Hunter Mountain and upstate in the Catskills in upstate New York. And I don't know what their New Hampshire footprint is.
Yeah, and obviously prices are going up, but ski resorts are also becoming more expensive to operate because they're reliant on more and more snowmaking due to climate change.
That's right. And one of the big advantages to the consolidation of the industry is that in Vermont, climate change doesn't just result in warmer winters, it results in more variable winters. So if Vermont has a bad winter, then Vail will benefit from their properties elsewhere in the country. So the consolidation in the industry gives these companies a lot of geographic diversification.
Mm-hmm. And the sort of more casual skier, maybe the family skiers, are the ones who end up paying for it because they're the ones who kind of get squeezed out of priced out from enjoying the sport.
And in that way, they are, they're eating their future because, it's those families, those young kids being introduced to the sport who become the future adults who want to take their families on ski vacations.
Yeah, yeah. So today, just so people want some numbers on it, today fewer than 10 million people in America ski in any given season. So it's and that number has been shrinking for the past 4 years at least. And this year we'll probably see, probably fewer, maybe 40 million visits to ski hills total, which basically means there's roughly about as many people who there's roughly about as many visits to ski areas in the entire country put together as there are visits to Central Park in 1 year. Which is kind of crazy. And the question is, does that include snowboarders too? Yeah, so that's skiers, snowboarders, everybody who does the downhill sports. But Ben, this is really great to talk to you, and I apologize, my sound wasn't working at the beginning, but yeah, why don't you hop on the
No
list?
problem. You carry on with the show, and
Yeah.
I'll have my video on for the ride up this Madonna lift, and
Okay.
if we're lucky, we'll see some people throwing some backflips off of the large cliffs that's through the very challenging run underneath this lift.
Yeah, yeah. All right, awesome. So maybe when we're going to look at some slides, and so maybe rather than have me in the window in the top corner talking, we'll have Ben's view going up the hill, and we'll also check in with Cindy in a little bit. But thanks so much, Ben.
Absolutely.
All right, so we kind of jumped to the end of the story, bringing us up to the present day, but we wanted to check in with Ben, who really knows a lot about the industry and someone who I've been skiing with for a long time. But now we're going to go back in time, so we're going to go way back to really the introduction of skiing to North America, to the United States, and talk about the evolution. And when we talk about the evolution of skiing, we're really going to talk about the three M's, as I like to call it. We're going to talk about migration. We're going to talk about the middle class. We're going to talk about mechanization, and we're going to talk about the military. So these are kind of the four forces that really propelled skiing to become, a major form of recreation in this country. And Amy says, great to see it's been a good snow year so far. Sort of. We actually got a bunch of snow in December, and then Christmas week, it got up to about 60 degrees and rained, and it basically just destroyed the entire snowpack here in Vermont. So it's taken, a good month to kind of get that back. We luckily got a bunch of the snow that also hit New York over the weekend. Yeah, we're doing okay, but certainly not a banner year. So yeah, let's check in with Cindy before we dive into the slides. Hey, Cindy, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Good to see you.
Good, good.
So I was one of the kids that grew up skiing on a landfill hill mountain
Yeah,
in the Flint area in Michigan, and then I raced in high school, and I was like from one of those families that we used like a lot of times use ski equipment and ended up it ended up being my most favorite sport, and I raced at the state level, especially in slalom. I miss it so much, as Andrew knows. But I'll just give you a view. I'm here at Queechee, which is it's a smaller mountain than Smuggler's Notch, and here we have some racing gear. But I'm going to make my way over a little bit later to the top of one of these trails, and so I'll give you a view later on in the program. That sounds
yeah,
good.
yeah. So
But
Cindy's at Queechee, which is literally about a mile from where I'm sitting. So it's a small mountain by comparison, but to the big resorts. But compared to a handful of the small community mountains that we still have in Vermont, and the tons that used to exist, Queechee is actually pretty. It's pretty sizable. You can see we have a quad chairlift now, so it's grown. But back in the '60s, there used to be um, 80 ski hills in Vermont. Now there's about 20. So again, that the forces of consolidation have really squeezed the smaller mountains. And Queechee, I think, is able to survive because it's part of a larger country club. So you also see resorts trying to become 4-season resorts and not just relying on the variable winter and the ski season. So Amy asks, is it private? No, it's open. It's open to the public at Queechee. Yeah. All right, Sin. So why don't you
great.
make your way down and we'll check in with you in a little bit.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay. All right, so let's dive in here to the history, and we'll talk about the early history of skiing and really the evolution, because we're going to talk about the kind of different disciplines of skiing. This program is really about downhill, or what we call alpine skiing, and that's something that's really only emerged over the last 100 years. But it has predecessors that go much farther back than that, that we really need to address in order to understand the evolution of the sport and kind of how we got to where we are today. Because I think we're also seeing, we saw this divergence between alpine and Nordic skiing, and in some ways they're sort of coming back together in a lot of ways. So let me pull this up here. So let's talk about the very oldest origins of skiing. Skiing is probably about 8,000 years old. And it probably emerged somewhere in what is today central Russia in the Ural Mountains. And as those people that lived in those areas, the Finno-Ugric people migrated west into what is today the Nordic countries, Scandinavia and Finland, they probably brought skiing with them. And so that is where skiing really evolved into the modern skis that we have today are really in those 3 countries primarily, in Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And Norway is the country that we're going to probably talk about the most because it had the most influence on American skiing culture. So here we can see this is the Sami people, indigenous people from the northern region of all 3 of those countries. So the earliest records that we have of downhill skiing in the United States actually go back to the 1850s. It's likely that Norwegian immigrants brought skiing to the U.S. sometime in the 1840s. 1841 is the earliest record we have of what today we would call cross-country skiing. But downhill skiing sort of evolved in this sort of in this isolated area in the Sierra Nevada mountains during the California gold rush and later the silver rush. And you had all of these mining camps way up in the mountains, deep, deep snow, and they were looking for something to do. Some of them were using skis to get around as a form of locomotion, but people started to race on them. So you could say that this is the kind of origin of downhill skiing. And this is the earliest known image of downhill skiing in America, which is in 1874. And it really was sort of entertainment and used, principally for gambling and drinking and things that you would do in a prospector's camp. But that was kind of it. Once the mines closed, they couldn't strike any more gold or silver in the Sierras. The sport just kind of disappeared. So we definitely cannot draw a straight line from this kind of activity that they were doing in the Sierras to the downhill skiing we have today. It's sort of, emerged and then kind of petered out and didn't become, anything sort of widespread or mainstream. But then as we jump ahead to the 1880s and 1890s, we start to see large numbers of Scandinavians coming to the United States. And again, especially Norwegians, who would play an outsized role in the popularization of the sport. And the timing is interesting because it's the 1880s, 1890s. At this time, Norway is actually in a union with Sweden. But in 1905, it would become an independent country. And that's an important date because 1905 is also the year that Norwegians would get together in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and found the National Ski Association. And so this is the predecessor to today's U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association. And here you can see the founder on the right, Carl Tellefsen. And I mention sort of the political context of this because skiing became a very big part of Norwegian national identity. And promotion of the sport was also about promoting the good things about the Norwegian people and promoting sort of national vigor. This is a time of nationalism in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And the Norwegians really saw skiing as an important part of that identity. And so they celebrated people like you can see here, the polar explorer Fridtjof Nansen on his expedition to try and reach the North Pole in 1896. He was a big promoter of skiing for its sort of vigorous and healthful benefits. You also see that with another famous Norwegian polar explorer, Roald Amundsen. And so it really becomes wrapped up in identity. And so a lot of the ski clubs that are founded around this time are founded by Norwegians, and Norwegian identity, Norwegian language are very much tied into it. It's actually kind of hard for outsiders to break into the sport, although they are trying to promote it to a broader audience. But we're also seeing at this time, again, the popularization of winter sports. So this same year, 1905, this is when Lake Placid opens up for the resorts open up for the winter for the first time. And you start to see winter carnivals being launched. And so this really starts to take root, especially in New England in the first decade of the 20th century. Now, they were promoting cross-country skiing, what today we would call cross-country skiing. Again, it's meant to be vigorous exercise, but as a spectator sport, people thought it was kind of boring. But there is another element to the Nordic skiing disciplines, which is ski jumping. Which is very exciting to watch and became very popular. And so while the sort of Norwegian nationalists wanted to promote the healthful benefits of cross-country skiing, most people wanted to either watch ski jumpers or sort of test their mettle in ski jumping themselves. So here you can see, and this is Ishpeming, Michigan in the Upper Peninsula. So that's where the Ski Association was founded. You can see their ski tournament with the ski jumping on the cover. And so ski jumping started to proliferate across the country, and jumps were built all over the place. And I see Cindy is, we'll take a little view into Cindy. She's at the top of the hill. Cindy's not going to be doing any daredevil jumping today, though, I don't think.
No, I won't.
But these ski sports make their way to New York City and Brooklyn, and so we have some images here of ski jumping in Prospect Park. So the first example of the first documented example of people skiing in Prospect Park is in 1911, when, no surprise, a pair of Norwegian immigrants, Harry Selmer and Akel Arnesen, they actually had to get permission from the parks commissioner to ski in the park. And so they did. And eventually people started jumping, as you can see here. This is, I believe, what's today known as Sullivan Hill. And it actually takes several years before you could ski in the park without having to get special permission. My mom just dropped in here. She mentions that my dad in 1961 broke his leg on a ski jump at Norwich University. So yeah, there are fewer and fewer ski jumps today. I'm sure in part because of insurance reasons. Yeah, so ski jumping became this sort of popular spectator sport. So here you can see there's sort of a informal competition in 1912. By 1914, it becomes more formal, and this is in an issue of Popular Mechanics. And you can see the crowds kind of gathered. Not a huge, impressive jump, but it was becoming more and more popular. But at this time, we're still really just talking about what we would consider the Nordic disciplines: cross-country skiing, or overland skiing, backcountry skiing, and ski jumping. We don't have the idea of quote unquote downhill or alpine skiing doesn't exist yet. You would go downhill, but you'd also probably have to go uphill as well. So that's kind of where we're at, and it'll be in the next decade, in the 1920s, when alpine skiing emerges and really starts to become a much more kind of broader, popular sport. Let's check in with Ben here, who's on the ski lift. Hey Ben, how's it going?
Hey guys, how are you?
Good.
I waited this long lift line on this nice afternoon, but here, I'll turn my camera around, and well, there we are. And we're heading up to the top of Madonna Peak, one of the I think one of the top 5 largest peaks in Vermont.
Nice. Oh, that's a nice
One thing about the independent resorts that we were talking about before is that they maintain their old time character. And here you can see characteristic of this mountain. We're on a very slow 2-person chairlift, whereas the big Vail resorts will have fast super speed 4-person chairlifts, 6-person chairlifts, gondolas, trams. They like to keep it simple up here.
Yeah, still faster than the 1-person chairlift that they have at Mad River Glen.
That's right.
But we're going to talk about the evolution of chairlifts as people start figuring out ways to go down the hill, and they don't want to walk up the hill anymore. So uphill conveyance is also something that emerges really in the 1930s. And where Cindy is actually is just a few miles away from where the first ski lift was installed in the US in 1934. And so we'll take a look at some pictures of that. But yeah, thanks for showing us this beautiful winter wonderland, Ben.
No problem.
All right. Okay, so we're up to now about 1912, 1914, and let's take a look at another kind of important innovation that took place, in this area, which is the creation really of the first outdoors club, ski club in the US at a college, which is the Dartmouth Outing Club, which was founded in 1909. And again, in these early days, colleges would be really central to the popularization of the sport, in part because it was considered a daredevil sport and young men like to do dangerous things. So here you can see the Dartmouth Winter Carnival in 1912, and they're doing ski jumping. So these college towns would become kind of magnets for people coming to want to enjoy winter sports and also watch these spectator sports. So Dartmouth would be a big location for that. Williams College in Massachusetts, and also our alma mater. Me and Ben went to Middlebury College in Vermont. So the sport is, or skiing, is starting to become more popular. People are coming to these winter carnivals, and in response to that, the railroad companies start to create special trains that will go to these winter carnivals and later to these ski resorts. The earliest of this probably is in 1931, which is the Boston and Maine Railroad that would go up to locations mostly in Maine and New Hampshire. And the ski industry starts to develop more rapidly, especially in New Hampshire, largely because of its proximity to Boston. But New York would also, the New York Central Railroad would also establish these lines going up into upstate New York as well as into Vermont. So you can see the New York Central Special Ski Train from the early 1930s. Here you can see one from 1935. So as we're talking about the second M, which is mechanization, we see mechanization of transport, both getting you to the mountain and then also getting you up the mountain. So here you can see Bear Mountain, President's Day weekend. You can take a special train to see the ski jumping tournament. So this year from 1935. But even as people are starting to leave New York City to seek out skiing, it's still popular on the hills in Prospect Park. So you can see people starting to do this emerging discipline of downhill skiing at Prospect Park on Lookout Hill. So this is sort of near where the, if you know where the Maryland Monument is, sort of in between the peninsula and the Nethermead at Prospect Park. Here's some more images from the 30s of Prospect Park. And so by making it easier to both get to the places where you can engage in the sport as well as to get up the mountain, it makes it more accessible to a much wider audience. So that's really the story of the 1930s, is increase in popularity, but also in accessibility. Because we now have this new sport is kind of emerging of people actually wanting to go straight down the mountain. And so this is what I was referring to before, which is the first rope tow in the United States at Clint Gilbert's farm in Woodstock, Vermont. So just one town over from where I am right now. And so you can see a Model T engine sort of attached to a rope tow that would take you up the hill. Now, alpine skiing obviously was not invented in the US, it was invented in the Alps, and sort of emerged in the early 1920s when the first slalom competition was held in Switzerland, and it really starts to be sort of standardized and popularized in Austria, especially. And so it makes its way to the United States in part by some of these instructors from Europe coming to the US and teaching their techniques. And the main technique was called the Arlberg technique, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But that's how people now are learning to control their descent down these rather steep hills. And so this is the first rope tow installed in the US. It would shortly move one hill over after some dispute over the revenue that the ski hill was generating, and it would move over to a place called Hill Number 6, and so it would be dubbed Suicide 6, which is still around today because that hill was deemed much too steep for people to be able to safely ski down. Even by today's standards, it's pretty steep, and it's a great little mountain and has steep terrain for how small a resort it is. But this is where we had the first kind of uphill conveyance in the U.S. This would be followed by the ski mobile, which was a tram at Cranmore Mountain in North Conway, New Hampshire. And then that same year, we'd have the first ski lift, which was in Sun Valley, Idaho. And you can see here, there was a big spread in Life magazine about it, or the year before, I should say. And this was also something created by the railroad companies. Sun Valley was actually founded by the Union Pacific Railroad. They had all of these trains, and let's do a cut into Ben here. They had all of these trains, going through wilderness basically in Idaho, and they decided, maybe this would be a good place to establish a ski resort. And so the railroad company actually owned the ski resort, and they built the first chairlift in the U.S. here. Interesting story about that chairlift is it was actually based on a device that was used for moving bananas and banana plantations used by the United Fruit Company. So this is sort of a modern version of that, but that was the basis for the chairlifts, which still use the same basic design today. Yeah, so Ben, you're on the chairlift there.
I am here. The run that we're going over, they've deemed too dangerous right now for people to ski down. I guess they don't think there's enough snow. They usually sometimes only open these runs just for an hour or two a day to conserve the snow on it. And you can see we're heading up into, I don't know how long you'll be able to see my view, because we're heading up into a cloud right there at the peak of the mountain.
Well, let's check in with Cindy, who's also on a ski lift. Hey, Cindy.
Yes, I am. Hey.
Looks like you're almost at the top.
I am. So I've just been riding up, listening to the program. Yeah, having a great time. There's so many children skiing, so many families. Yeah.
That's great. That's always nice to see. All right, so we'll let you disembark, and Ben too, and maybe we'll check in a couple of minutes. But it's nice to just get a little break and see some views. But we have a bit more ground to cover in the history. So okay, so ski lifts. So prior to that, all the other lift designs that we looked at, they were surface lifts, but they needed a chairlift for Sun Valley because they needed something that could go, up to 2,000 feet over the valley floor, and a chairlift was really the only way to do that. At this time as well, the government is also getting involved in supporting skiing, and there are a number of different initiatives of the federal government during the New Deal. So this is Timberline Lodge in Mount Hood, Oregon, which was actually built by the Works Progress Administration. And we should remember that skiing is intimately tied to the public sector and public land, because the vast majority of ski resorts are on public land. They're in national forest land. And so the makes sense that the federal government would be involved. The Federal Writers Project also did a lot to promote skiing. So they wrote this guide, Skiing in the East. The New York State Guide also has a lot about the state's burgeoning ski industry, written in the late 1930s. But one of the things that would really help popularize skiing, especially in New York, was the Winter Sports Show and International Ski Meet, which was held inside Madison Square Garden in 1936 over, I believe it was 3 nights. And so they built a 70-foot tall temporary slope inside the old Madison Square Garden, so that skiers could come down. And some of these famous European ski jumpers from Norway, but also alpine skiers from Austria came to the U.S. For this show, and this really helped to put the sport into the popular consciousness in the U.S. in a big way. Now, one of the people who participated in that show was Hannes Schneider, known sort of as the father of modern alpine skiing, because he helped develop this Arlberg technique for downhill skiing. Around this time as well, you have the development of the first bindings that will actually hold your heel down. So you can get much more control when you're making a descent, because the traditional Nordic bindings, your heel is free to move around. So here you can see Hannes Schneider skiing down in a, looks like a three-piece suit. But he, made several trips to the U.S., helped popularize the sport. He was featured in a couple of German films about skiing, and he also wrote the first kind of instructional book to the skiing technique, written in English. Or translated into English. So he really helped to proliferate the skills and ski schools in the United States. Now, 1936 is when we have the first alpine skiing at the Olympics. 1932, they were in Lake Placid. There are no alpine events, but they do alpine demonstrations. They officially become events at the 1936 Olympics, which are held in Nazi Germany. And so this is really when the sport sort of becomes official, and does help to popularize it, but it also has other impacts. So here you can see the first downhill event in the Olympics, won by Crystal Krantz. And here you can see, this is just a couple years later, you can see the Hannes Schneider Ski School in North Conway, New Hampshire, because in 1938 is when we have the Anschluss, when Austria is annexed by Nazi Germany. Hannes Schneider was actually thrown in prison during this period for supporting the president of the Austrian Ski Federation, who is Jewish. He manages to get out of jail, and he flees and comes to the United States. And there, he would not be the only Austrian refugee who would come to the U.S. And help to promote and popularize the sport of skiing. So he goes to Cranmore in New Hampshire and sets up his ski school there. So here you can see, this is, we're getting into the 1940s, and you can see the proliferation of these ski resorts all over New England. I know it's a little hard to read, but you can see if one of those pies has the top left and the top right are filled in, that means they have ski trails as well as ski tows or ski lifts. And we can see on the map right here, this one right here, this right here, I believe is Suicide 6 right here. But a lot of the resorts that you may be familiar with are not here yet. You know, there's no Killington on this map yet. That hasn't been set up. There's no Sugarbush on this map. So a lot of those would be built in the post-war period. And really the entire ski industry in the Western United States, with a few exceptions, would be built after the war. And the war would have a huge impact. So this is Minnie Dole. He is the founder of the Ski Patrol. So he wanted to set up a network of mountain rescue volunteers that could provide medical care to injured skiers, because injuries were very, very common. I mentioned that you now had bindings that could lock your heel down, but they locked your whole foot in place. So if you fell, your ski was not coming off, and it was probably going to twist in a direction you didn't want it to, leading to a broken leg. Very, very common. He himself broke his leg skiing and thought there should be a better way to get people off the mountain. So in 1938, he helps to set up the National Ski Patrol. But the following year, the world becomes engulfed in war, and so people are thinking about, fighting wars in some of this mountainous terrain. Now, ski troops have been around probably for 1,000 years. More formal ski units were set up in European armies in the early 19th century. Here we can see the army of these are French troops, but Austrians, Italians, Germans also had specialized alpine troops with skis. We can see some of these paper dolls that we talked about in the program last year. Let's get a beautiful view from Ben while we're talking about this, who is at the top of a trail. You're going to do some glade skiing, Ben?
I've dipped into the glades here, and this is just a particularly beautiful spot on the mountain where we have this gorgeous hallway of trees that lead to a steeper section that I'm not going to be able to hold my phone for, but it's just really beautiful spot in nature here. I'm going to poke through these trees right here. And you could see a view in the distance, and it's just really gorgeous getting a moment alone and with all of you in these gorgeous woods. It always amazes me that in the time before these lifts, it would have taken quite a mountaineer to get to a spot like this, and now we could just drive up to a ski mountain and take a lift, and half an hour later we're standing atop a beautiful peak.
What's amazing too is that a lot of the woods you might go through in Vermont, 40 years ago, there might have been a ski hill there that there's no longer any evidence of it anymore. But that's such a beautiful view. Thanks so much for sharing with us, Ben, and enjoy your run down.
I shall. Talk to you soon.
Okay. So, ski troops, have been around for a long time. Minnie Dole actually got very interested in that, in part because of his friend David Bradley, who was a war correspondent, and he actually observed the actions of the Winter War. In the winter of 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland, and the Finnish troops, despite being massively outnumbered and outgunned, did shockingly well against the massive mechanized Red Army, and they were able to do that because of their proficiency on skis and their ability to move through this very, very rugged terrain and launch these hit and run attacks against the Soviet columns, especially in the area today known as Karelia. And so Dole, inspired by Bradley, decided to approach the U.S. Army to see if they'd be interested in forming their own ski troops, which I shouldn't say they never existed. The U.S. Army had been on skis since the 1870s because the U.S. Army Cavalry was responsible for doing anti-poaching patrols of Yellowstone National Park, and they did that on skis. So very, very small, specialized unit. So it wasn't as if the U.S. Army had never bought skis before, but it was pretty close to that. And so they eventually convinced the Army that they need to launch this unit, which would eventually become known as the 10th Mountain Division, one of the most famed units in the U.S. Army. And they really do a tremendous amount to popularize skiing, to put it, so their wartime service puts it into the popular consciousness. But they also trained thousands and thousands of people, young men, to be skiers that would become ski instructors or just take up the sport as a recreation. And they would also open up resorts all over the country. So here you can see their outfit from their first winter in 1941. At this time, they're actually at Mount Rainier in Washington State. So you can see he's holding a Garand rifle. They actually weren't allowed to fire their rifles at all in their first winter of training because they were inside a national park, and firing guns in a national park is completely prohibited even by the Army. And so what they do then is they pick up and they move to a place called Camp Hale. They build this camp in the Eagle Valley, not far from Vail, and begin winter training. And so the original approach to creating the 10th Mountain Division was, they said that it's easier to make soldiers out of skiers than skiers out of soldiers. And so they recruit skiers. And as a result, as I said, this was very much a sport that had grown up in American colleges on the East Coast. It was the most educated unit in the U.S. Army, had far more college graduates or people who had any college of any kind than the Army in general. But what you also found was that you had highly experienced skiers as your enlisted soldiers, but their officers were not skiers. They were drawn from other units. And so you had the enlisted men that were teaching the officers how to ski. So it set up a very kind of interesting power dynamic within the unit. I just want to recommend a book. It's Maurice Isserman, The Winter Army, really great history of the 10th Mountain Division, especially the kind of early development of the ski industry that basically created this cadre that would form the core of the unit in the early days. But of course, there really weren't enough young male skiers in the US to fill out an entire division. So eventually they would have to get recruits from other parts of the country who hadn't skied before and teach them how to ski. And that's what they would do here at Camp Hale. From the very outset, though, they did have to bring in a lot of people from outside the Northeast to be in the unit because they needed mule skinners. And because everything had to be moved by pack mule, they couldn't use trucks or tanks. They were a light infantry unit, so they had to use mules. So they had they had all these kind of college boys from New England, and then all of these, guys from the Deep South who were experienced mule skinners within the unit. And you can see here from this Life magazine feature, you can see through these portals past the most beautiful mules in the world. But they'd also have to kit out this entire unit. And so these are the skis and bindings that they were used. These are called Kandahar bindings. They'd been invented about 10 years before. And again, they allowed both a locked heel and a free heel configuration. And so they're demonstrating this in a film right here, but you're still using a leather boot and your ski is made out of hickory. Their skis were about 7 feet long. So they were very, very big and heavy. And they were used not for just going down, but for going up and over terrain. As I mentioned, a lot of immigrants joined the 10th Mountain Division. Skiers. Hannes Schneider became an instructor with the 10th Mountain Division, and a couple people who Ben is familiar with for sure were a pair of the von Trapp brothers, who had also left Austria as a result of the Anschluss, as we all know, if you've seen The Sound of Music. But Rupert and Werner von Trapp were also members of the 10th Mountain Division. I mentioned Ben because he actually got married at the Trapp family lodge in Stowe. And the family would help to, create the resort town there as well. So, the 10th Mountain Division, it actually wouldn't get sent overseas until the very end of 1944. And only see action for about 6 months, fighting in the Apennine Mountains of Italy. When the unit was formed, they really didn't know where they were going to fight. It was envisioned originally that they would probably be fighting in Norway. That the Allies would try and attack the Axis via Norway. That didn't happen. They didn't think they'd be fighting in the Alps because or they could have been fighting in some parts of the Alps, but it turned out that the Apennine Mountains and the Southern Alps is where they would end up doing their fighting in Italy. And we still have the 10th Mountain Division is around today. They were demobilized after World War II and then brought back in the 1980s. Today, the unit, it's not based in Colorado. It's actually based at Fort Drum in New York. And we have a number of units in the U.S. military that use skis. This includes units at Fort McCoy in Wisconsin, Fort Wainwright in Alaska, Camp Ethan Allen in Vermont. And we also have a rotational Marine unit, U.S. Marines on skis, actually in very northern Norway, in the area of Norway that's on the border of Russia. So yeah, you still can learn to ski in the U.S. Army today. But for the last couple minutes that we have here, I want to talk about the impact of the 10th Mountain Division, but also the transformation of the ski industry. So many of these veterans of this unit would then go to found ski resorts. So basically the entire Colorado ski industry was created by 10th Mountain Division veterans. So as Amy mentioned, that there is a monument to the 10th Mountain Division at Vail. There's also one at Aspen. So Aspen was actually a place that was kind of scouted by these men while they were at Camp Hale in Colorado. It wasn't too far away. And so this is one of those early founders, John Litchfield, who founded alongside Friedel Pfeiffer and Percy Rideout. But we also had Lawrence Jump, a veteran who founded Arapahoe Basin, which is the oldest ski area in Colorado. And then, about 15 years after the war, Peter Siebert would found Vail. But we also had people on the East Coast as well. Sugarbush and Whiteface were both founded by 10th Mountain Division veterans, and more than 2,000 ski instructors were also veterans of the 10th Mountain Division. So, it would have a huge ripple effect that would basically, explode the industry in the post-war years. And so, we've talked about the 4 M's now. We've talked about migration. We've talked about it becoming a middle-class sport, the mechanization of it, and the influence of the military. But I want to talk about the post-war period especially, because this is also, when you'd have this proliferation of ski areas, and it would also become, again, sort of a middle-class sport. There were more and more places where people could ski. They could ski affordably. The ski trains came back. Equipment started to be mass manufactured. It was becoming more sophisticated, but it was also becoming more accessible, whereas previously it had been, sort of largely a bespoke industry. And we can look at some of these innovations that took place in the United States. There's obviously a lot of innovation happening in Europe, but these are a few of the important innovations that happened in the US. The first release binding, which vexed so many skiers with broken legs. That's introduced in 1946. I know that name is Norwegian, but he was actually in the U.S. in Portland, Oregon. Hjalvar Fams, the Safe Ski was the first quick release binding. 1950, Howard Head introduces the first aluminum ski. Now, aluminum would only be the standard for about a decade or so, and then it'd be superseded by fiberglass. But this is really the first modern ski that's not just like a piece of hickory or a few pieces of wood laminate, but is much more kind of a space age piece of equipment. And Bob Lang would invent the modern plastic ski boot, so we can move on from those stiff leather ski boots like we saw the 10th Mountain Division using. So these would all kind of start to create ski equipment that resembles the equipment that we use today. It's the same kind of basic format of the skis, the bindings, and the boots that we use today for alpine skiing. But of course, one of the important innovations that we rely on so much today is the introduction of snowmaking. And so snowmaking really first comes about at Mohawk Mountain in Connecticut. And the founder of Mohawk, Walter Schoenknecht, would actually go on to found Mount Snow, one of the first kind of mega resorts in Vermont. But more and more places are reliant upon snowmaking today, and this is kind of where it all started. But also in the post-war period, as we see the proliferation of small community ski hills, you see these mega resorts start to emerge, but there's still, so many towns that have their own little mountain. So just as an example, around 1960, there were 700 ski hills in New England. And just as a point of comparison, there's only 1,500 towns in all of New England. So there's almost one ski hill, for every other town in all of New England. Today there's 80. So it's much, much, much smaller. And a lot of these small community hills have gone out of business, but we had a small community hill in New York City back in the 1960s. So from 1964 to, I think it closed in 1969, you could take the subway to go skiing. And this was in Van Cortlandt Park. And we can see someone posted a home movie of this on YouTube, and we'll share links to that afterwards. But yeah, and that was supported all by snowmaking. But you could show up to Van Cortlandt Park, and you could rent your skis and your boots and your poles, and you could even rent your clothes if you needed them. You have to go a little bit further outside New York City to do that today. If you want to go over to the American Dream Mall in the Meadowlands, they have indoor skiing there today. But there's no more ski lifts or downhill skiing in New York City parks today. So, this is around the time that this picture was taken. This is my oldest brother and my parents skiing at Wildcat Mountain in New Hampshire. So, this is something that my family has done. That's something I've done my entire life for as long as I can remember. But, like we said at the top of the show, it's something that's becoming less and less accessible to ordinary people. I know that I ski fewer and fewer days just because it's so hard to afford it. With a ski lift, but also, maintaining all of your equipment. It's a very, very expensive endeavor. So something like this, taking out a family of 7 is out of reach for so many families today. But, I feel very lucky that I've been able to engage in the sport. But I also find myself more and more trying to get out in the snow without having to pay for an expensive lift ticket. And so that's when I said before about, we see Nordic and alpine skiing diverge. We're seeing them in some ways converge today as more and more people are doing backcountry skiing, or what we call AT skiing, where you can sort of have a detachable heel. So you can go up the mountain and then you can ski down and make alpine turns. So sort of going back to this, hybrid model that a lot of people were doing a century ago, rather than sort of rigid division between, the Nordic skiing and the alpine skiing. But let's cut back to Cindy here and see what she's doing.
Hi there. So yeah, I miraculously, my phone has been at 1% now for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So I could cut out at any minute. But I have seen people kind of trudging up, not taking the chairlift
Yeah.
and using those skis. And man, is that good exercise. I wish I had a pair. I could use that kind of exercise, but I do see that here, and I'll give you a view. We're just approaching the chairlift unloading area, but I just wanted to thank everybody. And thank you, Andrew, for putting this program together. I didn't know this history, and it's so interesting. I've been skiing all my life. It's really neat to hear stories about the people behind the sport.
Yeah. And we're going to share, like I said, some more resources. I want to give a big shout out to this book, Maurice Isserman, another great book to check out. If you can find a copy of it, it's called From Ski Sport to Skiing. And it's really the history of skiing in the US pre-World War II. Also check out the International Skiing History Association. So we'll share a lot of those resources on our website. Let's just say hello to Ben here so we can say goodbye as he comes down the mountain. Anyway, he's getting on the chairlift right there. There you go. So Ben, thanks so much for sharing a little bit of the slopes with us today.
Thank you, Andrew. I learned so much listening to you.
Yeah. So thanks so much, everybody. We hope you have a great day. Maybe some of you will be getting out on the slopes this weekend or at some point this winter. But thank you so much. And so you can join us our next program. The Brooklyn Navy Yard is going to be hosting opening on the 10th of February. And then we're going to have our friend Nathan Kensinger on the 13th. So lots to look forward to